What's up, everybody? Today I am here to do a ranking of Edgar Rice Burroughs' John Carter, aka Barsoom, aka Martian Tales series. There's a total of 11 books in this series, and I just recently read the last one and made up a ranking and decided to do a video talking about these books from least favorite to favorite. And back when I read the very first Martian Tales book, A Princess of Mars, which is considered a classic of like science fiction, fantasy, which was written a very long time ago now. I forget when the first book was even written. It was like in the 1915 or something like that. This is a very old series that was like very kind of like pioneering and influential for like this sort of genre of like pulp, sci-fi, and fantasy. And this series went on to inspire other really big franchises like Star Trek and Star Wars. This is like the original like sci-fi adventure story, at least that I'm aware of. And back when I first read the very first book, I didn't exactly fall in love with it. I didn't even plan to read this entire series after reading that first book. And as you'll see in my ranking, the first book is definitely not like my favorite book of the series or anything like that. However, I was still curious about checking out some of the other books at that time a few years ago after reading the first one. And as I continued through the series, it started to grow on me more and more. And there's a lot of creativity and imagination that goes into this series in terms of like the lore and the world building of Mars, which is called Barsoom. The Martians know their own planet to be Barsoom. They're known as Barsoomians. And there are so many different like races of Martians and creatures and plants. And Edgar Rice Burroughs definitely put a lot of creativity into creating this world, which is one of the things I really like about this series as a whole. Of course, going along with our main character, protagonist and hero of the series known as John Carter. And yeah, I'm definitely glad that I read through this series. And while not all of it is great, as you'll see here shortly, I would say about half the series I really enjoyed. And then there's a few books, the first ones we'll be talking about, I didn't really care for. But yeah, finally read through this whole series. And I guess let's just get right into it. Again, going from least favorite to favorite, as we usually do. And I do have them split up into categories, kind of. The first three books I would consider kind of bad. Like, the last book that we'll be talking about, or I guess the first one in this ranking, is one I would consider to be truly bad. I did not like this book at all. So yeah, jumping right into it, coming in at number 11 on my ranking is John Carter of Mars, the 11th and final book in the series. This book was such a letdown. The series was, so good, and then we just end on such a complete dud. It just fizzles out into nothingness, and yeah, this book was terrible. So this book is split up into two novellas. It's not just one, like, complete story. In the first novella, I've heard or read somewhere online that it was actually written by Edgar Rice Burroughs' son. It's kind of like ghostwritten. And while I don't know if that is like 100% true, I do know that it was definitely not written by Edgar Rice Burroughs himself. The writing style is so different. The writing feels very, very amateur. And this first novella feels like really bad fan fiction. That's the best way I can think to describe it. It feels like a really badly written fan fiction of John Carter of Mars. It's very amateurish. The lore is just kind of like made up in this own story. It has really nothing to do with, while it has a lot of the same characters in this novella as the rest of the series, everything else just feels like kind of made up exclusively for this story, and it doesn't follow the lore and the rules of Mars and all of the different things like that go along with the rest of the series. And it is just not good at all. Like, I gave it that particular novella like a flat 1 out of 5 stars. It is by far the worst thing I've read in this series. I was like skimming through some of it, even though it's very short. It's only like 60 to 70 pages. All these Martian books are very short, or most of them, like averaging up between like 160 to a little over 200 pages long. But yeah, that first novella, not good at all. And then the second novella was written by Edgar Rice Burroughs and is considered to be like the finale of this entire series. And the second novella is called, I believe, The Skeleton Men of Jupiter. Yes, The Skeleton Men of Jupiter. And I did not really care for that one either. It was a little bit better. It was obviously written by Edgar Rice Burroughs. But it just feels very formulaic. I mean, all of these books kind of are, and it's not anything new or interesting. It just kind of goes over a lot of the same plot points, formula, and stereotypes that we've seen before in the series, and it feels very half-assed. And it also ends like very, very abruptly. It just all feels very rushed. It just felt like Edgar Rice Burroughs was just kind of plodding along and just writing more of these stories just for the sake of money or pumping them out for the publisher, whatever the case may be. And it almost like feels like a rough draft too. Like it felt like he didn't even finish this novella. Maybe he didn't. Maybe he passed away before he finished writing it, or I'm not really sure. But it was not good. That second novella in here is like a 2 out of 5 stars. So not much better than the first one. So yeah, overall I give this book a 1.75 out of 5. While the next couple books also coming up in my ranking I don't really care for, I think this is the only book in the series that I would say is like truly bad, in my opinion. And it's sad because this is the last book in the series, so it's kind of sad that the series went out on this note. So yeah, that's John Carter of Mars coming in at number 11 on my ranking. Okay, not much better than that. Coming in at number 10 on my ranking is Synthetic Men of Mars. This is the 9th book in the series. And this one has kind of an interesting idea at first. So we are following one of the side characters in this book that is, I believe, newly introduced in this book. I don't even remember his name. One of the Red Men of Martian, the Red Men of like Helium or whatever. And he's assisting John Carter on this mission to find Ross Davis, or Davis, however you pronounce his name, who is known as like the mastermind of Mars. They need his help to like help perform this surgery for Deja Doris, John Carter's wife. In order to save her life, she has some kind of brain disease or something. I don't remember. It starts out like kind of an interesting plot, assisting John Carter. It was nice to kind of keep John Carter in the stories because a lot of like the middle books of this series and some of the later ones were just following random side characters. However, as the story progresses and we go through like kind of the usual plot points where John Carter and this side character, our narrator of the story, get wrapped up in this new race of Martians they discover that take place in like this swamp-like setting that's kind of depicted here on the cover. John Carter ends up escaping, and then we are following our protagonist for the rest of the story. And the whole plot line that's introduced at the beginning of this, where John Carter is trying to find Ross Davis to help save Deja Doris, completely abandoned. We don't get any of that throughout the entire story until like the last 2 pages. They come back around to it at the end. Instead, what we get is following this side character that we know nothing about, that's newly introduced to this book. We don't really care about him. We don't know anything about him. He's just this cardboard cutout Red Man of Helium. And he falls in love with this other Martian girl that he sees that he's never even met before. That just so happens to also be imprisoned by these swamp creatures, these synthetic men in this marshland area. And he's trying to rescue her throughout the story and also escape from this place. And yeah. So basically we just get another formulaic insta-love here with a random side character that becomes the hero and is trying to escape. And all of that stuff we got at the beginning is just completely abandoned. So yeah, I did not care for this book. I gave it a flat 2 out of 5 stars. That's Synthetic Men of Mars, the 9th book in the series, and coming in at number 10 on my ranking. Okay, and not much better than that. Coming in at number 9 on my ranking, we have The Mastermind of Mars. And this one is book number 6 in the series. And this one we are also following another side character. This one is a little bit interesting, I guess, because this is the only other character in the entire series that's also a human, along with John Carter, who gets like magically transported to Mars. And he has pretty much all the same abilities that John Carter has because of the, I don't know, gravitational pull or effects of Mars. He's able to like leap high in the air, and he's a lot stronger and faster than all the other Martians because science, I don't know. And I believe his name is Ulysses, and he basically gets transported into this part of Mars that's being ruled by Ross Davis, the mad scientist. And there's a lot of like Frankenstein stuff going on here where Ross Davis is like transporting different brains to bodies and things like that. And then you also get, of course, your typical formulate plot in here where Ulysses falls in love with this Martian girl, and her body or her brain is like being transplanted into another body, and he tries to save her and like get her back and make Rostavus swap their bodies and brains back and forth or whatever. I don't remember. I've already forgotten a lot of the details in this book, along with a lot of these other ones, especially these ones that I didn't care for quite as much. So yeah, this one I also gave a flat 2 out of 5 stars. Not quite terrible. There were some interesting things in here, but one of my least favorites of the series. So yeah, that is the Mastermind of Mars, 6th book in the series, coming in at number 9 in my ranking. Okay, coming in at number 8 on my ranking is Thuvia, Made of Mars. This is book number 4 in the series. And this one, I will say, probably has my favorite cover out of every book in the series. I just love this cover. It's so cool. And in this one, we follow John Carter's son, Cathoris. And in the Tarzan series, the 4th book in the Tarzan series is called The Son of Tarzan. And in that one, we were also following the son of the hero, the son of Tarzan. I forget his name. And I did not like that book at all. And I think it's kind of funny that he did the same exact thing with this series. Actually, this might have come before Tarzan. I don't remember the exact date that one came out. But yeah, I think this one actually came before Tarzan. So he kind of did the same thing in that series with this one. Both of them being the 4th books. Both of them following the son of the hero. And much like that Tarzan book, I did not care for this one. I'm not sure what it is when Edgar Rice Burroughs focuses on following the son of like the main hero and protagonist of the series, and then kind of puts his son through a lot of just the same tropes and formula of him falling in love with this girl, going and trying to rescue her, and him becoming like the hero. I don't know what it is about that, but it just is never as good. It doesn't really appeal to me as much. And unfortunately, this cover, just amazing cover, does not... the story does not live up to the amazing cover, is what I'm trying to say. There are some interesting things in here. You know, this book isn't as bad as like the last few that I talked about. I just didn't really care for this one quite as much. There's like a race of Martians in here that are like imaginary, basically. They exist because of certain characters like imagining their existence, like mental powers. I didn't really care for that. There's a lot of like weird different creatures and races of Martians in this book, and I do kind of enjoy learning about that and seeing Edgar Rice Burroughs be creative with all of these different ideas, but this one I didn't really care for. And yeah, Thuvia, Made of Mars gets a 2.25 out of 5. It was just kind of okay. Okay, coming in at number 7 on my ranking, I gave this one the same rating as the last one. It's not really much better. And that is Lana of Gthul. This is book number 10 in the series. I also gave this one a 2.25. And this one also has kind of a cool cover. I like this one too. And this is the second to the last book in the series. And I just was not a big fan of this one. It just felt like, once again, we are just going through the same formula over and over again. It just feels like Edgar Rice Burroughs is kind of running out of ideas at this point. And is just writing these for the sake of just, I don't know what the case is, money. I don't know if he was under a contract at the time or just to keep publishing these. I'm not really sure, but yeah, we just kind of go through the same formula. John Carter is out with, I think, a couple of his friends. They're captured by a race of Martians. They escape. They are on the run to go back to Helium, their homeland. They're captured by another race of Martians. There's a lot of fighting and action. And of course, John Carter is basically invincible. It kills everyone that gets in his way. And yeah, there's really not a lot in here that we have not seen before, which is why I just didn't really care for it. It was just, but this wasn't a bad book, and at least we are following John Carter, and with John Carter obviously being like the highlight, and like one of the best things about this series. He's just such a larger-than-life character and such a fun hero to follow, and even though it is kind of predictable because you know he's always going to win and always overcome the villains, it's still always a good time just watching him kick some alien butt. So yeah, this book I gave a 2.25. It's just okay. Comes in at number 7 on my ranking. Alright, we're starting to get into a little bit better territory now. Those first few books I talked about, that's like the worst half of the series. I didn't really care for those as much. But from here on out, I would say these books are at least decent to good. And then my top few will be like very good. So Coming in at number 6 on my ranking is A Fighting Man of Mars. This is book number 7 in the series. And I think that this is probably like the best book in the series that follows a random just side character. So kind of like Synthetic Men of Mars and like Mastermind of Mars, we are introduced into a totally new character with this book that we don't really know much about, and we're not really given like much reason to root for this character or like him. And once again, I've already forgotten like the name of the character. But unlike those other books, this one was actually quite fun. And this is a little bit longer too. This one is 240 pages. I think this might be the longest book in the series. And at first I was a little bit apprehensive because the book opens up with this new character once again falling in love with this Martian girl, and she is captured and whisked away by these villainous characters, and he sets out to rescue her. I'm like, oh boy, here we go again. The same exact formula and plot that every single one of these other books uses. But however, as the story progresses and we get further along, there's actually quite a few subversions and sort of surprises along the way. We don't exactly get the exact same formula as a lot of these other books. There's a few plot twists, and I also really liked some of the races of Martians that we get in this. Every single one of these books has like a thing where there's this new undiscovered race of Martians that is uncovered. Some different creatures that we haven't seen before, even though they've been on this planet for how long now and have been across Mars, or have been, across almost the entire planet. But yet they still continue to discover like new races of creatures and Martians. I think it's kind of funny, but I actually like some of the creatures and stuff that we find in here and races of Martians. Edgar Rice Burroughs' imagination, it feels like it was pretty on point with this one. I feel like this was a pretty creative book compared to some of the others, especially for being like kind of a later one in the series. And I like some of the plot twists in here. One of which, minor spoiler alert, our main character, the girl that he falls in love with, she might not be some innocent Martian girl that was kidnapped after all. She might have some like ulterior motives, and maybe he doesn't end up rescuing her, and maybe she might be in like cahoots with like the villains. So yeah, there's some interesting stuff in this one. I didn't quite love it, but I thought it was pretty decent. I gave it a 2.75 out of 5, almost a 3 stars. It was a little bit long, and like the first half was a little bit slow, kind of going through, again, kind of the same formula that we've seen in the other books, but it really picks up in the second half of the book. I really enjoyed the second half of this book. So yeah, Fighting Man of Mars comes in at number 6 on my ranking, and it is the 7th book in the series. All right, now we're moving on to the good ones. All right, so coming in at number 5 on my ranking is The Warlord of Mars. This is the 3rd book in the series, and the final book in like the original trilogy. So the first 3 books in this series are considered part of a trilogy, and really you can read like the first 3 books and then be done with the series if you want to, if you so choose. These first 3 books tell like a self-contained, like kind of isolated story, and then from there we go on to follow different side characters and such. But yeah, this is the last book of the trilogy, The Warlord of Mars, and it was pretty decent. It was good. I gave it a flat 3 out of 5 stars. I liked it. It was a good conclusion to this trilogy. I didn't quite love it. It wasn't like my favorite book of the series. Obviously, we still have a few to go. I've already forgotten, again, a lot of what happens in this series. I read so many books that it's hard to retain memory of everything that I read, but I remember thinking this one was pretty decent. So yeah, The Warlord of Mars comes in at number 5 on my ranking, and it is the 3rd book in the series. Okay, coming in at number 4 on my ranking is the very first book in the series, The Princess of Mars. And this one also gets a flat 3 out of 5 stars. But kind of like a high 3 out of 5, if that makes sense, like a very solid 3-star rating. That means I still liked it. I still enjoyed it. I thought it was good. It's just not something I fell in love with or thought was like amazing. And as I was kind of saying earlier, back when I first read this, I don't know how long ago it's been now, 2 or 3 years ago, I didn't immediately fall in love with it, and I had no plans to continue and read the rest of this series. However, over time, the more I thought about it, I was like, you know what, I'm kind of curious. I want to see where this series continues to go. I did have fun with this first book, And this first one is interesting because it's quite a bit different than the rest of the series. This one feels sort of like an introduction to this world and to John Carter as a character. He doesn't immediately become like this hero and just this badass guy going around saving the day and defeating evil Martians. He's magically transported to Mars, and he feels like a more like normal human character in this book, which is kind of what I like about it. Even though this is very like high, like sci-fi fantasy adventure, it feels a little bit more realistic than the rest of the books in the series, where we're just following John Carter and his sort of reaction to this just crazy experience of him being transported to Mars, and him learning to deal with that, and him learning to deal with like the different gravity on Mars, and he's captured by these Martians like almost immediately. And I don't know, I think maybe if I went back and reread this first one, I think maybe I would appreciate it more and possibly even rate it a little bit higher and maybe move it up on my list. But this is a pretty decent introduction to the series. You know, there's not a ton of crazy stuff that happens in here, but it kind of opens up this world and this character a little bit. And it's a classic. I mean, it's not quite a top favorite of mine or a book I would like go out of my way to recommend to everybody, but if you're into like pulpy fiction, that you know, like sci-fi fantasy, I would definitely recommend checking this out. But I don't think it's quite the best book in the series. So yeah, the very first book, Princess of Mars, comes in at number 4 for me. Okay, coming in at number 3 on my list, we're starting to get into the pretty good ones now. My top 3 books are all ones I would say that I really enjoy. These are all like very good books. Not quite perfect. None of them were like perfect to me, but the rest of these are like very good books. So coming in at number 3 on my list is Swords of Mars. This is the 8th book in the series, and it's just, I'm kind of surprised that a book this late in the series made it this high up on my list, because I feel like that's when the series started to go downhill, was like in the later half of the series. However, this one I really, really enjoyed, and this one we are once again following John Carter, the protagonist of the series, after we got a bunch of books just following random side characters that we didn't care about. We are once again following John Carter in here, and John Carter goes on this mission to sort of immerse himself in this world of underground assassins in order to kind of like bring them down, to like take them out. There's like all of these like secret underground guilds of assassins on Barsoom that are just like killing all of these different Martians and people. There's just a lot of death and like high crime rates, I guess, going on. And John Carter decides to take it upon himself to go undercover and like basically train himself in the ways of these assassins and get involved in these guilds and pretend like he's one of them, kind of, to try to like take out their leaders and like put a stop to all of this. And this book kind of reminds me of like something you would see in John Wick. This is like the John Wick of the series. John Carter is basically going undercover and is like playing kind of innocent at first and pretending like he's just a nobody. And he's like planning on taking out and killing all of these assassins. And then soon the jig is up and they discover who John Carter really is, and he has Martians coming after him. And this is a very fun and action-packed book where you have all of these aliens and different Martian and creatures coming after John Carter and trying to kill him. But because John Carter is obviously like the most badass person on all of Barsoom, and because his earthly strength, you know, he's naturally stronger and faster than any other Martian, he kicks all of their asses. We also get a really cool second half of this book where I believe some Martians like kidnap Dejathoris and a couple other people, or I can't remember, and they take them to like one of the moons on Mars, and they have to fly to like this moon to rescue her, and they discover once again a new race of like Martians living on this moon, and they're like invisible. And it sounds like really crazy and weird, but it was so much fun. I love the second half of this book as well. It did feel a little bit rushed, and it had kind of an abrupt ending. Like at the climax of the book, I felt like it could have went on for a little bit longer. It felt a bit rushed from what I remember. But I had a ton of fun with this book, and it was so cool to see John Carter back again after getting so many books in the series, just following a bunch of random side characters. So yeah, this book was awesome. I gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and it comes in at number 3 on my ranking. That's Swords of Mars. Okay, coming in at number 2 on my ranking, is The Chessmen of Mars. This is book number 5 in the series. And I also gave this one a 3.5 out of 5 stars, so kind of tied with Swords of Mars. Honestly, I couldn't really decide where I wanted to put these. I like them both similarly. In this book, we follow John Carter's daughter. I'm already forgetting her name. Tara of Helium. We're following his daughter. And his daughter is kind of like a spoiled brat. A little bit. Obviously, she has the most famous and richest like parents on all of Barsoom, being Doris and John Carter. So she's a spoiled brat, and she has like a little bit of a rebellious side to her. And she decides to take a flyer out on Mars, I think, one night. And I can't remember exactly what happens, if there's like some kind of storm or something happens to the flyer and it gets damaged and she crash lands somewhere on Barsoom, far away from her hometown of Helium. And she gets captured and taken in by these Martians that have these heads that roll off their bodies. And they have like this giant farm of headless bodies that just wander around. And there's like these just head creatures with like tentacles that sprout out of like their neck region. And they use that to crawl around. So they're like spiders with just heads, kind of. I don't know how to describe it. And they crawl around and they attach themselves to these different bodies and move around. And anytime they want, these heads can just roll off the bodies and move to like a different... It is super freaking weird and creepy and absolutely batshit insane. And it was awesome. And then, of course, we have this other character in here that falls in love with Tara of Helium, who then sets out to rescue her. And then, in the second half of the book, things get even crazier. They manage to escape from these weird, headless Martian creatures. And they end up in another race of Martians where they play these games of chess for real, where they have these actual people playing this live game of chess in like this gladiator-like coliseum, and they have these captains or commanders that command the different people to move different squares. And when two people like meet on a square, they basically have to sword fight to the death, and then whoever is the survivor remains standing on that square. And this idea was just so much fun. Such a cool idea. I absolutely love this part of the book. And if I have any flaws or anything negative to say about this book, is we didn't quite get enough of that. I wanted to see more of that chess game. It felt almost a little bit too short. I wanted like an entire book or an entire series just on that. It was just such a fun, such a cool idea. You have these guys commanding these different Martians, and it goes into the strategy a little bit, like talking about what soldiers are stronger than others and faster, which ones have better sword fighting abilities. So they have to like think about where or which soldier they want to send to certain squares to fight another one of these Martians or people. It's just such a fun idea. I love this book. I also gave it a very solid 3.5 out of 5 stars. And yeah, comes in at number 2 on my ranking. Not quite perfect, but I had such a fun time with this one. So yeah, that's The Chessmen of Mars. Okay, and then my absolute favorite book in the Martian Tale series by Edgar Rice Burroughs is the second book in the series, The Gods of Mars. And I think the reason this one is my favorite, or at least a large part of the reason, is this book is just so action-packed. Now, this is the middle entry in the original trilogy, being the second book. And of course, we are following John Carter here. And the cover here is really cool too. You have John Carter and his green Martian friend. I believe his name is Tarkus, or something like that. I forget their names. These Martians have some weird names, and it's hard to remember them all. But yeah, I think a large part of the reason that this one is my favorite book of this series is just how action-packed and violent that it is. And while that is kind of a centerpiece of the series as a whole, and it's in a lot of these books, this book is just non-stop, just action and fighting, and it is just very intense and suspenseful at times, and I never got a sense of that in any of these other books. And even though John Carter is always going to come out on top and be victorious, there were times in this book where it kind of makes you question, like, is he really? Is John Carter gonna fight his way out of this? Like, he basically has every Martian on the planet coming after him in this book. And John Carter, he has like a couple of friends, or a few friends fighting alongside of him. But for the most part, he is alone and basically trying to survive and save his wife, Dejadores, in this book. And it is crazy. This book is just so action-packed, so violent, and it is like just non-stop throughout the entire book. And I just loved every minute of it. Yeah, this book was so much fun. I gave it a 4 out of 5 stars. The Gods of Mars, the second book in the series, I think is the best one, or at least my personal favorite. So yeah, that's The Gods of Mars. This is my favorite book in the series. Alright guys, that is my ranking of the Martian Tale series by Edgar Rice Burroughs. If you have read any of these books, let me know what your thoughts are on them down below in the comments. That's all I have for today, guys. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.